Welcome down the rabbit hole, friends. Thanks for joining me here tonight. This is a complicated and seemingly never-ending case of a mother heading to trial this week on charges of contributing to the deaths of her 2 young children. But tonight, I'm here to discuss the origins of Lori and Chad Daybell's religious delusions.
This morning, all eyes are on an Idaho courtroom. A jury there will decide if Lori Vallow killed her 2 children. Vallow is accused of killing 7-year-old Joshua JJ, 17-year-old Tylee Ryan, and her husband's late wife, Tammy. The news of her children's death came after the grandparents reported them missing in 2019, after Vallow privately married the Doomsday author Chad Daybell in Hawaii and joined his religious group.
Ever since she's been involved in this Doomsday cult, that is not the same Lori that we knew for 13 years.
I've made it obvious in my prior videos that I feel religions can be a hugely positive force in the lives of an individual or a community. But that's only when people choose to use the doctrines and teachings in a way that serves others positively. Among all religions, Catholic, Muslim, Mormon, there are those who seek to use the teachings and community for their own personal gain, to serve their own selfish desires. They may twist or manipulate those around them to serve their purposes, and this type of religious abuse is never more present than in the case of what became of Chad and Lori Daybell, who would eventually come to think of themselves as Mormon prophets, charged with leading up a community of those specifically chosen by God to survive the apocalypse. It's likely you've heard all about this case on TV and through the most recent Netflix series about Lori. But what's been missing for me is in-depth insight on their earlier lives and connections with the LDS Mormon doctrine that fed into the delusions created by Chad, Lori, and a whole community of people who supported them right up until the finding of Tylee and JJ's bodies.
Tonight, a nationwide search for 2 missing children has come to a gruesome end. Family members confirmed that the remains found on Chad Daybell's rural property in Idaho are the bodies of his stepchildren.
The families of 8-year-old JJ Vallow and 17-year-old Tylee Ryan saying in a joint statement, "We are filled with unfathomable sadness that these 2 bright stars were stolen from us."
By the time the alleged murders of Lori's children took place, Chad and Lori had already been living and creating a life based around the following beliefs. Chad and Lori believed they had extraordinary abilities, including teleportation and calling up natural disasters at their whim. Chad believed in reincarnation, and they both believed that they'd lived prior lives in which they'd been married to each other and experienced some kind of great love affair. Chad told everyone that Lori was an exalted goddess who was sent to earth to bring about the second coming of Jesus. Chad alleged he had a series of near-death experiences in his past, which helped him lift the veil of his reality and merge his being with realities beyond what other people experience. He saw himself as a prophet who was going to usher in a new era, following the annihilation of millions during an apocalyptic event. Lori and Chad were both longtime members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and while most average Mormon people who you or I would meet out on the street are consistently friendly, rational, and kind, there are several aspects of Mormon doctrine which contributed to the development of Chad and Lori's deviant fantasies, eventually leading Lori to view her own children as being filled with dark light, eventually referring to them as zombies and stating they were in the way of God's final plan. Shortly after, the two children would go missing for many months until their decomposed bodies were found on Chad Daybell's property.
Justice.
We are aware that those remains are the remains of children.
Police, joined by the FBI, unearthed those remains outside his home in Idaho and arrested him. He's charged with willfully destroying, altering, and/or concealing human remains.
The foundations of Mormon doctrine contributed heavily to Chad and Lori Daybell's beliefs, starting with a strong belief in personal revelation. In the LDS Church, personal revelation is expected and encouraged by those who attend, and many converts believe that personal revelation from God was instrumental in helping them convert to Mormonism. Personal revelation is the idea that one can and will receive personal messages from God in one form or another through rigorous prayer and strong adherence to the standards of Mormonism. There is no specific guide on how one would receive this message, leaving it up to the receiver to distinguish when they have a gut feeling that they are receiving a special vision from God, and leaving the receiver to figure out how to go about acting on that message. Joseph Smith is quoted as saying, "No man can receive the Holy Ghost without receiving revelations." Every person within the church should be receiving personal revelations from God for his or her own benefit. And then those people who are in leadership positions, like a bishop or a stake president, they actually receive revelations from God for the members over whom they preside. This is normal and expected within the Mormon temples across the United States. And it is exalted when a member claims to have a personal revelation from God. Chad Daybell believed he was receiving constant such revelations. We now know that Lori relied on a revelation which told her that she must marry Chad, and Lori told everyone in her life she believed her current husband, Charles Vallow, would die to make room for her new and sanctimonious marriage. Sources who've spoken out extensively about the family consistently state it was mostly Chad who declared that he received these frequent revelations from above, and he would direct Lori about how to help these prophetic images come to fruition. Towards the end of their time together, before Lori was arrested, it's alleged that Lori said she no longer was receiving any revelations from above, and she had to rely solely on what Chad was telling her to direct the momentum of their movements in the final days before everything came toppling down for them. Mormon doctrine strongly emphasizes the second coming of Christ. The doctrine states a second coming of Christ will take place, though the timing is unknown and never officially identified by the church. But the church does adhere to the Mormon theory that there will be a time of tribulation and cleansing before the arrival of Jesus. Many lives will be lost during this time, and only the chosen will remain to repopulate the earth. In describing some of the evil that will exist in the last days before the second coming, Nephi spoke of vain and foolish doctrines, pride, secret works of darkness, false teachers, and false churches that persecute the poor. Lori and Chad Daybell specifically came to believe that the second coming was fast approaching, and that a large congregation of 144,000 chosen people needed to gather in Rexburg, Idaho. Chad had specifically moved his family to this location and owned a large amount of land he used as a farm. Tylee and JJ Vallow's bodies were found buried on Chad's farmland. Rexburg, Idaho, has a large population of self-identifying Mormons, many of whom knew and loved Chad, believing he was a great husband and father, as well as a leader in their religious community. Chad often gave talks for the local Mormon temple, where over 2,000 people would show up to hear what Chad had to say. Mormons strongly believe in the concept of acquiring large amounts of food storage. After being an avid Sister Wives watcher, I found it so interesting to realize that, like the Brown family, Chad and Lori Daybell and the community of people who supported them believed heavily in the Mormon direction to obtain and store large quantities of food to help survive when the second coming and time of tribulation actually took place. A big piece of what was going on with the Daybells in the days leading up to Lori's arrest is that they were busy collecting and fundraising for items, safe locations, and money to help prepare for the second coming. They believed many would face great suffering during this time, and it was part of their role to prepare food, shelter, and medical supplies for the 144,000 chosen by God to survive with them in Rexburg, Idaho. When thinking of the Daybell case, we also have to acknowledge the Mormon plan of salvation. Okay, something I was totally unaware of is the religious teachings of past and future lives, as well as teachings about the veil in Mormonism. Reincarnation has never been a wholly orthodox or well-publicized facet of Mormon theology, yet it has a long history in the tradition. It has been taught and believed by a surprisingly large amount of people in LDS society, including general authorities. It's clear that a huge part of Chad and Lori Daybell's belief system was based in the idea of reincarnation. Chad and Lori constantly told friends and people around them that they had been married in prior lives, and they were the reborn version of famous Mormons from hundreds of years ago. Chad Daybell attended Brigham Young University, and the university's website actually addresses the definition of the veil. We define the veil as the border between mortality and eternity. It is also a film of forgetting which covers the memories of our earlier experience. The concept of the veil is something that Chad Daybell used on a regular basis to convince people he was having superior revelations because his veil was so thin due to his near-death experiences. It was almost like he was in direct communication with God and many past Mormon men and women of distinction. Chad's belief that he could lift the veil to receive all of these revelations from beyond the world as we know it is very much rooted in true Mormon doctrine, and is part of the reason why Chad was able to convince so many other Mormons in his community to believe in and follow him. In certain communities, Mormonism de-emphasizes the value of scientific teachings and evidence to rely more substantially on natural remedies and belief systems that have been in place for centuries but don't necessarily stand the test of time. The people around Chad and Lori Daybell fell for their rhetoric for an awfully long time, despite much evidence to contradict what Chad and Lori were telling them. The community Chad and Lori targeted for the support of their impossible narrative was ripe for manipulation from a leader like Chad Daybell, especially with the history of God-sanctioned polygamy in the religion. We know that currently the mainstream LDS Church doesn't practice it, but it is still part of the history of the doctrine. Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, likely practiced it and even participated in relationships outside of marriage, though that's considered blasphemous to talk about. Chad and Lori also relied heavily on the Mormon teachings of celestial sealings and eternal marriages, convinced that they were sealed to one another for eternity, and convincing others that that's why they had to move on from their current marriages, so that they could fulfill their destiny of eternal marriage and become gods and goddesses in the new world. With much respect to the mainstream Mormon faith, there can be no denying that the development of Chad and Lori Daybell's cult-like empire is directly related to the perversion of the Mormon doctrine they claimed to follow. Chad and Lori likely helped kill and cover up the deaths of many people around them so that they could be together and ride out this prophesized apocalypse in a celestial bunker. Many friends and family did not identify the clear evidence that this couple was dealing with severe mental health issues. They even ignored the hasty deaths of both of their spouses and the disappearance of Lori's children. Please join me down the rabbit hole for part 2, where we will take an extensive look at Chad and Lori's childhoods, their families, and what motivated them towards becoming failed Mormon cult leaders.